We've just had the wonderful Yorkshire 3-day event at Bramham Park. And for those of you that don't live in Great Britain, it is about bang in the middle, and it's a long way from the south for English people. They have to drive about 4 or 5 hours, which for those of you that live in America and Australia is next door. We've had the great good fortune to have Bramham Park at our disposal for eventing for 50 years, 50, half a century. And we've had the enormous good fortune to have Ian Stark as the course designer for 15 of those 50 years. And he has, as he promised he would, retired. This was his last go at Bramham. He says when he's 70, he's not going to go on anymore, and he's 70 this year. And he's going to be an enormous loss because he has produced, yet again, the most phenomenal cross-country course. It is so beautiful to walk it. The ground is fantastic at Bramham this year. They were actually having to slit it a bit and water it because it was already drying up. It is that sort of soil that dries very, very quickly. But it looks so amazing, the stripes on the mowing, and you just couldn't wait to get on a horse and ride it, really. Anyhow, Ian finds it very nerve-wracking. He cares tremendously that horses understand his questions and can give themselves an education, and he likes nothing better than to watch something like Ros Cantor, an MHS 17, who is in his second year of 4-star and is another very tall horse with Ros at 5 foot nothing. And he said it was just lovely to watch that horse going round, just gathering confidence all the way and getting better and better and better. Obviously being given one heck of a ride by Ros, and he chipped in at the first water, which was some big fences around the first water this year, and she just handled it perfectly and gave him all the confidence in the world so that he could leave the water happily. And he said that's really what it's all about, course designing. It's giving the horses the experience that means that they trust their rider more and they learn to love the game more. And this is why his retirement is such a loss to the whole world of eventing, because he designs in America. He designed the Maryland 5-star, the new 5-star that came in 3 years ago. He's designed that. Now this will be his last year there. And there's no doubt in my mind that he is a genius, an artist, and he will be very, very hard to replace. However, he's on his way to, he says, doing more with his grandchildren, doing some eventing with his young horses. Who knows if you won't see him at the Bramham 4-star short one day, because there's nothing holding him back. It was a very, very good day, really, for just about everybody except Saffron Cresswell, who had an extraordinary heavy fall and is in hospital at the moment, being, I hope, extremely well cared for. And we haven't had a report as to how she is, but talking and all that, which is good stuff. But it was a very, very heavy fall, and I did take a video of it to try and work out why it happened. And I've watched it many times and I still can't understand. But she came out of a wood over an oxer, dark wood, down a steep bank to a steep hill to a triple brush on either 4 or 5 strides, whichever line you decided to take. And it almost looked to me like he went through the bridle and he didn't just sit back when she asked him to, and went to stand off on 4 and then said, no, I can't, I'm going to put in a 5th. And the 5th brought him right onto the bottom of the triple brush. Now, triple brushes are usually not very safe fences. They're very frangible, very squashy. And because he put his feet almost on the bottom of the triple brush, he then sort of lurched across it. He didn't manage to jump across it and turned turtle, thank goodness, not landing on her, but fired her into the ground pretty firmly. And it's really shocker thing for anybody to have to go through a bad fall. None of us do it for that reason, but we do know that it does lurk. And I suppose that's one of the excitements, is that it is a dangerous sport. Anything to do with horses is dangerous. Even dressage can be dangerous. It's half a ton of horse that isn't always doing exactly what you want. And I always remember the poor working pupil of a very, very top level rider who was kicked in the head when she bent down to pick a horse's foot out by him kicking with his back foot at a fly, and that did for her. So it's an extraordinary thing, and you have to be so brave, but also understanding that if you were to step into a car and drive, you would have a great deal higher chance of doing yourself in. And I think it is important that we recognise that after having the tragedy of Georgie Campbell leaving us at Bicton. But Saffron hopefully will be on her way to recovering well, and we wish her very well, and her family, who it's never any fun having somebody not quite having somebody who has had an accident in the family. Horse was fine. Um, the rest of it, I saw some very good riding. As Ian said, there was some quite green horses and some quite weak riding. But on the whole, the standard has just shot up. And the people that wanted to be at Bramham were the people that wanted to be challenged, because everybody knows that Bramham is tough, not just because Ian is a genius course designer at creating the right level of problems, but also because the ground, the terrain, is fairly undulating. It's not as undulating as Bicton. It's a different thing entirely to Burley, but it does go up and down quite steeply, even though they're not very long, the ups and the downs. So it takes stamina. And we only had 9 come forward for the under 25, in which Saffron Cresswell was competing. And that surprised me. In the old days, once the Young Riders Championships had dropped from 4-star to 3-star, the selectors still asked young riders to go to Bramham. But I don't think they do anymore, and therefore not too many people want to scupper their chances of getting in the young rider team by showing that at the level above what they're going to have to compete in European Championships in, they are found wanting. So those of them that are wanting to prepare themselves for future Burleys and Badmintons are doing the right thing to go to Bramham. But sadly, there was only 9 there that felt they were up for it, and it was actually very impressive. They rode, I thought, extremely well, and on the whole did a really, really good job. And then that laid the way to the 4-star long, of which actually the 4-star long came first and intermingled with a few of the young riders who were riding 2 horses, and then they had their own class at the back end of the 4-star long. The 4-star long probably had about 40 people in. I never did count, but it wasn't as many as usual. And the 4-star short, which then took up the rest of the day, must have had 90 people in it. And remember, Chatsworth was taken out. So there was a lot of people who got into Bicton who wanted to do Chatsworth, but then with the appalling tragedy of Georgie, the last 25 in the last advance 4-star section didn't get to run. And so I think Bramham probably took quite a lot of extras. And it proved to be the most, I thought, superb competition. I've never seen the ground so good at Bramham, because after they had vertically slit it, and watered some of the harder places, it then poured with rain on Friday night, and a little bit of a storm for the ones that went first on Saturday morning, but then it did clear. And the going was just perfect because it had been slit in a lot of places that were a little bit firmer. The water went beautifully in, and I went round the course at the end of the day, and I was just so impressed by the way they printed without going in deep, and I was also very interested in the lines people took, and I think that's why I do love to go round a course at the end and see if my line was the one everybody took or not. And it will interest those of you that were watching Bramham. You would have seen the 4-star long do a really good job into a very steep sided coffin, which you couldn't really see because there was a camera that was dealing with the water that was just showing you the coffin, and you really didn't see the problem. You just saw whether the horse got through it or not. But it was a very steep sided coffin on about 19 feet to a ditch, and then up another very steep side to the final element. Whereas the Bramham 4-star short was in a different place altogether. It was nothing like the steep banks. It did drop away to the ditch, and they came out over a triple brush, which was more difficult. And I don't know how many people, but probably 8 or 9 came to grief at the in, and a few came to grief at the out. And I certainly saw 2, if not 3 people simply fall off when their horse stopped at part A of the coffin. And that has to be something that we all have to remember. If we fall off when our horse stops, we were definitely in front of the movement. And the one place you need to be in going into a cross-country fence, particularly a coffin, is that ready for trouble behind the movement slightly, with fingers ready to let the horse have whatever neck and head he needs over the fence. Anyhow, when I went back and walked the line, I was quite interested to see that they had cut in the majority of the field and only given their horses about 3 strides dead straight to part A, and part C lined up, therefore only 3 strides away. So they had a lot to take in a short time. And then as they got to take off, they suddenly saw the ditch. And that's why you go at a slow coffin canter or coffins, because they need to have time to see the ditch, and they need to have a short enough body, if you like it, to be athletic with their footwork and pop in little extra strides here and there if necessary. So there's a dual reason for having a coffin canter. One is to give them time to see the fact that the ditch is there and that they're not going to jump straight into it, and B, to help them be on their footwork and athletic so they can ping their way through the different elements of the coffin. Anyhow, quite a lot came unstuck. Could have been because they didn't get a straight line. It was certainly with some of them a straight line for long enough. With some of them, it was they just did not go slow enough. And we then saw the absolutely in vogue Irish rider at the moment, Austin O'Connor, bring his very, very smart horse through, who just won the 5-star in Maryland last October, and a younger one, I think a mare. And they both came in a very good canter and a very good balance, but quite fast, and did it completely beautifully. And I was commentating at the time, and all I could say was, well, that's how Austin has trained them, and they obviously think very quickly, and they had no trouble at all. But most of the people that went too fast ran into trouble, or not went too fast, went fast, the same speed as Austin went, ran into trouble. And his would probably have been the sort of pace you take on quite a big oxer in the show jumping, whereas probably it's better off if it was a pace that you were taking on maybe a 3'6", 1 meter 10 planks, rather than a great big oxer, that you have that controlled sort of bound, really, so that the strides are quite short. That may not be how you like to jump a plank, but it's probably the way I would, not off a great long open stride. So one of the best riders in the world, Austin O'Connor, showed us how to do it off a stronger pace. And I've seen other good riders do coffins off stronger paces. But I think to learn the job, they probably need to learn it off a slower pace. And judging by what we saw go wrong there, there's probably still a little bit a way to go before many of those horses can take a coffin on at the pace that Austin was able to, and very successfully too. So it was interesting. There's always so much to learn. Then we had the excitement on the final day of the show jumping, and the young riders held on to their placings admirably. And the final show jumping round of the day came from Tom Jackson and his beautiful grey horse. And Harry Mead, lying in second place, had done a clear round. And poor Tom knocked the first fence down and did the rest of the round beautifully. But in that first fence going, it took the win away from Tom, but he is many years to go before we see him retire. He's a very talented young jockey. And it gave it to Harry Mead, who has been in the top of the sport for a long time, has been producing horses to the top, has shown an incredible ability to withstand the rough times, because my goodness, he's had them, not least a horse at the end of the World Championship cross country, rearing over backwards in the concrete washdown unit in France, where the World Championships were 8 years ago, and basically doing himself in. The horse basically killed himself, rearing over backwards, which is just appalling. And then he had a terrible accident where both his elbows were broken in a million pieces, and he's had to get back from that. And then he had another one where his foot got caught in a stirrup. Beware of the stirrups with rubber sides, because his foot didn't move out of it when it should have done. And I've had my feet caught in the rubber sided stirrups. Be very careful. Um, and he was dragged, and so that gave him a head injury as well as elbow injury. And he has come through all of that with immense hard work. He does tremendous rehab at home, goes to rehab, and his wonderful wife Rosie has been absolutely the best supporter and organizer of him, along with a great team. And Jess, who's been with him well over 15 years as his groom. They are just an amazing bunch, and I cannot believe that they haven't won something big before, because they've done it right for so long. But sometimes you have to wait a long time, and another person that had to wait a long time, those of you that remember, was Andrew Nicholson. It was a long time before he actually scored that number one position. And he'd been in world championship teams, European teams, Olympic teams, and been placed here, there, and everywhere. But he finally got his win. And Harry has finally got his win, which I hope will open the door to many more. For it's thoroughly deserved by somebody who has a tremendous ability to concentrate, but also has a wonderful sense of humor and a great love of his horses, and a wonderful way of keeping his owners in touch all the time. And as we all know that try to event, it's very difficult to do this sport without very generous people helping us through financially. So it's been wonderful that Harry has been able to reward all those that have helped him through for so long, and those that train him, and just generally keep him up together and in one piece after all those injuries. That's no mean feat. So I hope you've all got a little bit of a taste of Bramham. It was wonderful. The weather was cold. It was only wet at the beginning of the Saturday and all of Friday night. So as we can happily say, it was a dry Bramham with some lovely sunshine, even though you wanted to keep wrapped up. And the going was the best. So Nick Lane Fox, his wife Rachel, they've had this kept this going after Nick's father George started it 50 years ago. And they have the Leeds Festival, the Pop Festival, in August, which gets so well attended and therefore can make enough money to carry the 3-day event with it, which doesn't make quite as much money as the Leeds Pop Festival. So if any of you love that sort of thing, no more beautiful place to go to a festival than Bramham Park, where there is literally 70,000 people, and there's room for everybody in that vast park. So thank you to Lane Foxes, thank you to the manager of Bramham Park. It's just been the most lovely weekend. Goodbye, everybody.